Pizza people, welcome back. Hollywood Pizza here. And today we're actually joined by a special guest. So we've got HamHocks42 as per usual. HamHocks, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing well, man. How about you?
I'm doing really good, just hanging out. And we're joined by our special guest, OhOneNine. How are you doing today, OhOneNine?
Incredible. Incredible. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really glad to actually have you on and get to talk some magic with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where we can find you as well.
Yeah, so started playing Magic about 1996. I believe the first booster pack I ever opened was Ice Age. But I would say the majority of the time I spent getting introduced to the game as a kid, I mean, I was probably 8 or 9 years old, was around the like Urza's block. So like we're looking late 90s now, 98-ish, which is ironic because it's now in retrospect, perhaps one of the most powerful blocks of Magic, excluding, of course, ABUR. So yeah, it was an interesting introduction to the game. Yeah, otherwise, besides playing in Paper Magic, which I do here with a local play group that I have in Northern California, I also stream on Twitch from time to time. Same name everywhere, OhOneNine. I also upload videos to YouTube occasionally. Same name on YouTube, OhOneNine, and that's about it. Twitter, Instagram, everywhere you'll find me. It's all the same name.
Ham, where can everybody find you at?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitch, HamHocks42. I'm also on YouTube doing the thing, posting videos every so often. So yeah, again, HamHocks42. I kept the number in the name so that it was, so it would be available absolutely everywhere. So that's the move. By the way, if you're if you're out there and you're like, how do I establish a brand on the internet? Like, go ahead and keep the number. It looks a little awkward, but you'll get your name everywhere. Yeah. So yeah, you can even just Google HamHocks42. You'll find me. Yeah.
For sure. And you can find me as well, twitch.tv/HollywoodPizza. I usually stream a Magic 3 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And then the fourth day would be our tournaments. We do host 3 free tournaments a month. You can find all these links in the description below, so definitely check all that information. But today we're mostly going to be talking about kind of some guides towards competitive Magic, mostly because we host tournaments, so we kind of want to give you a little bit of some insight, maybe a little bit more of an edge over some of the other competitors as well, considering that you're going to be listening to this cast and you're also going to be watching most of our content that we put on the channel here. So the first topic that we actually want to dive into is going to be good ways of keeping your skills sharp. So essentially this could be anything between remembering how to play your lands in the right order, making sure that you're sequencing your spells, and specifically kind of like who's the beatdown, right?
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
these are all kind of like strategies that help you essentially kind of like dictate uh, how you're going to play your game. Maybe not even necessarily how your deck would essentially synergize most of the time, but kind of like feeling out your specific situation and kind of like going from there, right? Like I feel like a lot of the time, like you're both players can get these draws where the game happens and you do your thing, and then one you kind of like explodes and goes off and then beats the other person, and then that's it, right? Or you know you get to do it however way. But there's also like a lot of the time that Magic comes down to like a little bit of like a grind, right? Where like things don't go right, people stumble on land drops, maybe people stumble on mana curve, they don't hit all their spells right on time. Like there's a lot of different situations. So I think that in terms of how you can kind of like guide yourself and learn from those situations, uh, that's specifically kind of like what we're going to get into today. Ham, what would you say is kind of like a good way of essentially keeping your skills like sharp, like making sure that you don't necessarily get too much burnout from MTG, but at the same
Mm.
time, you're also kind of like learning and getting better overall.
That's a great question. You mentioned burnout. That's actually a great call out because it's easy to think, oh, I just need to practice more hours. I just need to put in more time. And yes, there is an element of that. Like you need to be putting in the work, you need to be putting in the time if you're going to try to compete at a high level, especially if we're talking about, tournaments where cash prizes are on the line that, people who really know what they're doing are going to be gunning for them. If you want to be at that level, if you want to be competing with those folks who are going to be bringing their A game every single time, it's really important to put in, you do have to put in some time, but also make sure to rest. That's very important. If you find yourself getting tilted, go ahead and take a break from the game for, even if it's just a couple hours, if you're like, here and there, like it's okay to just go for a walk sometimes and unplug, or even play something else if it's going to be, okay. Like, don't beat yourself up. Don't think that it has to be Magic all the time. That said, of course, it's mostly going to be Magic. Let's be honest. It's what we're,
We're
it's what we're here
content
to talk
creators
about.
too, so we play
It's,
Magic
yep,
like
100%.
a lot
Totally
more
get
than most people probably would on a regular basis.
Oh yeah, no, we just recently, actually, as of today, as of this recording, they sent out one of those stats emails, and every time I'm like, man, I play way too much of this. But
Right.
yeah, but I love it. I'm not gonna lie. But the other big thing that I think is critical is, if you're going into a competitive environment, know the cards. Know the cards that you have in your deck. You need to know exactly what you've got and what the likely, at least have a decent idea of what the likelihood is of what you're going to draw. But on top of that, more importantly, you need to know what your opponents are playing. You need to know what you're likely to run up against. And that's going to help you understand when you're the beatdown or when not. Like, we've all had those moments when we're watching a tournament, or when we're watching even one of our friends play, where they make that attack and you go, wait, was that the right move? And then a turn later, they have the win. And the reason that those moments occur, like, everyone can win a game when they're ahead by a mile. But knowing when you have those little bits of advantage is really where it comes down to. But in order to know when you have those openings and those little moments when you can chip in for a little bit of damage, or those little moments when, if you're going up against control, knowing when their guard is down, if they have 2 blue mana open, okay, you need to be concerned if you're playing in, modern or legacy, where counterspell is legal. If you're in standard, maybe that's not an issue. Like, is there a 2 mana counterspell in this format? And if there is, can it touch a creature, or can it, you need to know those details in order to understand where your openings are, so you can take advantage of them when your opponent does present them. Because if you don't know the format, if you don't know the cards, obviously you're not going to know what opportunities you have and what obstacles you're going to face in any given game.
Oh, and when you say that, a lot of that is pretty much, that's all just like facts straight up. Like, it really comes down to how many repetitions you put in your matchups, how well you know your deck, and then essentially kind of like how well you know other people's decks, kind of like looking at what the most recent list of a Spirits deck is, or, what the most recent list of Rakdos Sacrifice.
Right. I'll kind of address the first part of this we had talked about there, which is burnout and exhaustion from the game. And this is in no way meant to be kind of some corny HR reflection on our lives outside of Magic, because we all constantly see in our work outside of Magic, if we do have jobs not as full-time content creators, recommendations for ways in which to avoid work exhaustion. Because the honest truth is, the quality of the work that you produce, not just in producing Magic or climbing the ladder or whatever it is, the measure of success that you have, but anything, really is impacted by layers of exhaustion or pushing yourself beyond where you should be. And again, this is not meant to be a touchy-feely HR moment, whatever. What I'm saying is, legitimately, if you are serious about pushing the ladder, you need to assess what an appropriate amount of time of playing the game is day to day, because you are going to start to regress and damage your, if you're already in the, again, that quasi, that difficult to capture area between like high plat and high diamond, and you're just grinding and grinding. You just want to get to mythic, and then you're like, okay, once I get to mythic, maybe that's just your goal for the season, or maybe you have aspirations to push further. But after a certain amount of time, you're going to make poor decisions based on your exhaustion, based on your just kind of seeing the same play patterns over and over again. You're going to start to make mistakes. So my recommendation is, just like with real life, I say real life outside of Magic, with your work life and anything else that you do, define a certain parameter for how much time you want to commit to it, and don't deviate. The second part, we were talking about ways in which to improve. Ham, you were talking about ways in which to improve your game.
Yeah, ways in which to improve the game, and specifically like knowing your cards and knowing the meta, and understanding what you're going up against.
Kind of like understanding like overall, like, because in competitive play, it's a lot like data's out there, so you know what you're gonna face, right, as long as you do your research.
Yeah, if you're not using Scryfall, MTG Goldfish, and all these other assets, you are you are immediately at a handicap. You should have those open as you're playing the game. Now, granted, a lot of those are based on tournament results, right? So that doesn't represent the same thing. One of the big topics that we'll probably get into more is the difference between open list tournaments, like the ones that are hosted by PizzaBox and others, and actually just climbing the ladder. Is the percentage of those decks that you would see is not fully representative of what you're going to get if your goal is simply to climb the ladder on Arena every season. So information is available, but also be able to decipher that information and understand the differences there. There is a strong, I'll say I even had a series a while ago that I probably should resurrect. I used to call the anti-meta, in which you look at, let's say, the top 3 decks right now. Let's take Explorer, for example. Ham, what do we got? We have Rakdos Midrange as the de facto. Yep. We have Mono Blue Spirits. And I would say probably the third is either mono green of some variant, whether it be
I'd
Karn
say
or
green
Coco
or like
or
the
Henge.
Cat Oven deck, probably.
And then Junt.
There,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. So we'll take those 4 decks.
Okay, yeah,
so
sounds good.
Let's take those 4 decks and we'll define those here.
Red deck would be the 5th. We'll go with red deck too, because I think red deck's the other aggressive strategy. Like right now, like Azorius is a really good deck, but it really comes down to the player, right? I would say, in terms of like the actual like Explorer metagame.
Yeah, so let's say that those decks kind of define the general idea of what the meta is currently in the format as of August 2022. So what you can do is, if you're a player who, you can do one of 2 things. You can look at the lists that are there, and you can choose one and say, actually Spirits is really that's my type of gameplay. I like interaction at instant speed. I like being able to play creatures after my opponent has the opportunity to interact with them, whether it be via attacking or sorcery speed interaction. You can look at the list of meta decks and replicate. That's one option. There's nothing wrong with it. I think net decking gets a bad rap because it doesn't seem unique or inventive. But if your simple goal is just to climb the ladder, there's nothing wrong with it. The other option you could have is you could look at the meta deck situation here, like I'm trying to do every day in, day out, week in, week out, and say, what is the uniting factor between these 4 or 5 decks? What does Jun, Sacrifice, Spirits, Rakdos Midrange, and Mono Green all have? And how can I tie the 3 together and then find a card or cards that answer it one way or another? So an easier solution would be, for a while there in Historic, and in Standard too, actually, for a little while, a lot of combo control decks were around in the Jeskai realm, whether it be Izzet or just. So you could say, okay, what I'm going to do then, regardless of its best of 1 or best of 3, I'm going to build a deck that primarily focuses on interacting with my opponent's hand. So that's why for a while, and one of the times that I crawled my way to Mythic was forcing mono black discard. And look, you're going to lose against aggro. You're gonna need to take your lumps there against mono green or mono red. But if you assess the majority of the meta and you say to yourself, well, I'm going to lose 30% of the games just out of the gate because my ability to interact with mono red, I don't have the pace. But if the overwhelming majority of decks are combo or control, and you're able to tear apart the pieces of their hand with Thoughtseize, Duress, and all these other pieces, leaving them with nothing to do, nothing in hand, you're going to, over the long run, accomplish your goal of getting deep into Mythic. So those are the 2 kind of routes, I would say. And honestly, they both have their merits.
Yeah, I think both of what you guys said play like huge key factors in terms of like competitive Magic overall, like how you're going to approach it, like knowing your cards, knowing your opponent's cards, knowing the meta, using all your valuable resources, any type of like free information that you're able to acquire, gather as much of it as you can, jam as many YouTube videos as you can, watch some live streams of, kind of seeing different types of decks being played. I also want to give a shout to a certain degree, something I do think is still very, very important, which is limited play. I think that at the end of the day, the core elements of Magic are highly displayed in draft, sealed, anything like that. So I think that the more that you end up playing limited to essentially take a break from, let's say, you're getting burnt out from seeing too many Rakdos mid on the ladder, you're getting too burnt out from Hinata and Standard, anything like that, tournaments, like I think going to go do some drafts, anything like that, kind of takes away from being overly salty or kind of getting burnt out, like fatigue. Just like one of the main topics about this overall is like, you don't think straight when you're seeing a lot of the same patterns too much. You actually end up falling into a trap where it feels like your opponent almost has everything all the time, but in reality, you're not playing around their cards. You're like, oh, they
Right.
probably had
Right.
the push. I'm just going to play this. And, oh, yeah, of course it got pushed. It's like, well, maybe you shouldn't, have played it like that. There's other ways to essentially play your cards, especially each card, does like three different things now, so you can figure out what your best way of potentially putting it onto the battlefield is. So I think that, you know, taking the time to really get down to your core basics of MTG, like blocking, attacking, combat tricks, knowing when to use your removal spells, double blocking is like a tactic that I think a lot of people don't utilize enough. Or,
Hmm.
sometimes they think that they're just going to always get blown out. And, sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it's like, well, at least we got a card out of their hand and, we're still in the game. It's not like we're dead, right? Like, you stalled out essentially your opponent for a turn. Like, even that's like
Hmm.
somewhat of a warranted strategy, specifically in limited too. But I think that going back and forth and kind of finding a time for you to take a break and essentially, like, I think the main thing that I want to say too about this overall, um, on top of what you guys said, is winning isn't everything. Now, at some point, winning is something that you're going to want to do, right? Because you want to take down a tournament or you do want to get to
Sure.
Mythic. Don't get me wrong. So, winning is at one point going to be something, but I think that it's a lot easier to be upset and get tilted that you're not winning over the game screwing you or your opponent's draws being this or that, when in reality, it's you who's kind of like getting burnt out and overthinking the situation. And I think that like the majority of players really do get caught in this trap. And I think that you kind of have to like deviate away from that and, assess the situation and, take a break, take a step back and say, hey, maybe I need to be doing things differently. It's not just, the game is being a certain way. When you guys kind of like
Yeah,
agree to that?
I think I think it all comes back to kind of what we were talking about is define it when you approach Magic, particularly if we're talking about in a competitive realm, you need to approach it with some expectation of what you want out of it. What do you want out of playing this game? There is a very reasonable answer that you just play it because you enjoy it, and there is nothing. That's it, and that's the extent of it. And some people have a difficult time um, uh, coming to the realization that there's nothing wrong with that. You can just enjoy the game and just have fun doing it. I mean, it's an incredible game that we've all been enjoying now for, I mean, for myself, for decades. I know for you all, it's been a long time as well. It, there's nothing wrong with just playing the game to enjoy it and setting realistic expectations for how you're going to engage with the game. I think is a critical part of how you start with it. And if you're talking about burnout and you're talking about how you're going to approach each season or whatever it is you're doing, some people also play arena. Most people play arena, I would say, probably in addition to playing some amount of casual play, whether it be EDH or not, with their friends. So um, I think a good balance, like everything in life, we talked about work-life balance too. It's the
Hmm.
same concept. Just drag all that chummy good stuff that your HR company that they tell you all the time. Take a breather, step away. It applies to this game too. It's a game in the end. For some people, it is a living. So I don't want to minimize the fact that for some people this is very serious because it is their means of income. But for the majority of us, it's a thing that we enjoy, that we've been enjoying for a long, long time. But set some realistic expectations. Maybe you don't make mythic every time. Maybe you get to diamond and you say to yourself, okay, you know what? Now I'm just going to play some decks I enjoy. Maybe I don't need to climb anymore. Maybe the 8, 12, 14 hours it's going to take me to get deep into Mythic isn't worth it. And I can just play a goofy deck that has a low win percentage, but
You can
it's
learn
just fun
more.
because I
You can
like it.
brew. Like that's where
Yeah.
I think brewing's kind of gone to a certain degree because we're also worried about winning and getting to mythic. And arena a lot of the time incentivizes like a win to play type mentality. And we forget that we're mostly just trying to have fun as content creators. We're always trying to prove the next hottest thing, but at the end of the day, like we also kind of have to like remember that we have to find fun in the game, and it's okay to kind of make a cool janky deck. And if you get to do your thing a few times, then that's really cool. And if you even get to do it in the latter, which is like essentially like a competitive setting, you know, feels even better. And even if you're not, you know, obviously going like 10-0 with this new hot thing, which is obviously hard to do in any situation. Either way, you know, you're still doing something that you enjoy and something others enjoy at the same time. I mean, it really does come down to what you want to get out of Magic. And, you know, that's something that I always really do stress a lot is, you know, everyone kind of ends up getting in the same boat of complaining about bans, complaining about this card, complaining about this situation, complaining about that situation. And, you know, well, you know, sometimes everybody kind of just gets caught in like the uproar rather than remembering what they're trying to get out of the game, because not everything affects what they want, right? Like one banning in the most popular deck doesn't necessarily mean anything if you're not playing the most popular deck, right? Because you're
Yeah.
still probably going to be in the same situation if you're playing quote unquote jank deck, or you're playing something that's more like a homebrew, because you're still going to be up against the top meta deck, whatever the next meta deck's going to be. So I think that you kind of have to take everything a lot more lightly and not overthink that just because one popular decision happens, or just because one big thing happens, that it's necessarily something that affects you and you should like rally behind it and get behind it like a crazy way. Because everyone, you got to remember what you want to get out of the game. What you want to get out of the game is the most important thing. Like that's really what keeps you sane. That's really like what keeps you kind of like being able to play. Because just like any game, yeah, it does get frustrating where, you know, you're trying to beat the boss in the Dark Soul games or whatever, and you know, you just keep losing to it. And you know, that's kind of like MTG, right? Like you're just like, oh, now I'm in plat 1, almost a diamond, and then all of a sudden, you know, you find yourself getting burnt, and then now you're like back down to plat 3 and you're thinking about trying a different deck. You know, like it's,
Well, we've all been there where I'm at Diamond 1. I'm 1 win away from Mythic. Oh yeah, oh, you've been there too. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Where you're like 1 win away from Mythic, and then you play for another 2 hours, and all of a sudden you're at Diamond 3 or Diamond 4 again.
Oh my gosh!
What happened? How?
What
You know,
happened?
it happens
yeah,
though.
it happens.
You know,
Yeah.
it absolutely
You
happens. We've
lose.
all been there.
You lose.
You know,
You can't
it's
expect
a
to win.
high variance game. It's part of the deal sometimes. Like, you know, those bad luck streaks, they happen. Like, it's not fun, but it happens.
You know, you
yeah.
could. Yeah, I'll save it for another time. But that's one of those things where arena versus regular Magic, that's where the differences start to show up, right? Where
Right.
you know, a lot of its stuff is very reasonably variance, and I don't want to sound like, you know, the shuffler is out to get you, but
That's a whole other topic. Yeah.
there are times, my God, when it definitely does feel that way.
Oh yeah, no, I've had a couple matches, like, you know, even recently, we've all had those matches where even in like a best of 3 situation where you have to mulligan to 5 both games and you still don't hit your 4th land drop or whatever. Like, how is this happening? You know, it happens.
Yeah.
Like, we've all been there. You
Yeah,
know,
you're
it's
you're saying you know, you're crunching the numbers. I've seen even on some of the very I'm not going to name drop, but for some of the more popular YouTube channels that do content for MTG, mostly on MTG Online, they actually have a tab open in their browser where they have a number calculation.
I've seen that. Yeah, like
Or
the
he's
geometric like
okay, he's
statistic
like,
breakdown or whatever.
okay,
Yeah.
realistically, how unlikely was it for me to pull that third land or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
what were the actual
Well, I think
chances
that
that we
you
would
have
hit
that with
that
the
this
deck
game?
trackers now, right? Like Untapped and all that
Mhm.
kind of provides like the same thing where you're like,
Yep.
man, I was 40% to hit a land, you know, or like 45% or whatever. I'm like always looking at it and I'm like, man, like how am I not? Yeah, like
yeah,
Well,
it
and
just feels rough,
yeah.
right? Like,
No,
right,
I
exactly.
have that the untapped.gg tracker, not sponsored. They just do great work.
mhm.
And I
Right.
have that tracker up on mine too, and it has a little breakdown on the bottom that will show you the percentage that you have to hit a land. And I
Right.
had those games where I have like 15 lands in play. I've seen 20 cards, and I just need some action off the top. And looking at it, like, okay, I have a 13% chance to draw a land here. Freaking land off the top. What?
I literally have
Yeah.
a channel reward point things for it, because every time it happens, you know, you're 15 cards and you see 9 lands, and I just say to myself, wizards. You just, every time for me, it was so funny. It's gotten to the point now, and this might be the sign that I might need to take a little bit of a break from Magic. It's gotten to the point now where actually, if I have some frustration with something that I'm doing with my day job, which I do, I work from home. If I have some frustration, I'll catch myself because I almost yell out wizards, and I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's the other thing. It has
Nice.
nothing to do with Magic. It's because I'm like, and I'm like in my brain, I'm like 9 out of 15 cards have been lands. There's 23 lands in this deck. Well, you know.
Oh
So
yeah.
and you have to take those moments. You kind of do have to. Now, I'm probably the worst person because if you were to look at my video history, you'd probably see me significantly tilted more than once on things like flutter screw, and you're like, it's always too many or not enough lands.
Oh yeah, we've all been
Stuff
there.
like that.
Yeah, I've got some. Yeah, there's some VODs of me freaking out too. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when you got to take a break. Like as content
Mhm.
creators, we got to take a step back, and the viewers know that.
Yeah.
Everybody knows. Everybody already comes
I
and
will
plays
say,
MTG.
though, that
They know that this happens, right? Like they know that
Mhm.
you can easily get tilted from either flood or from screw.
I will say though, pizza, meltdowns are good content. I mean,
They
look
can
at
be.
some of the,
They can be.
go ahead and look at YouTube. Look at the number
Mhm.
of
Yeah, that stuff goes viral. It's it's
not
out there.
advocating for meltdowns on stream. Don't do it.
But if you
So-
do, post the clip and tag Strider Stone so we can get on
Yeah.
their
Yeah, there
weekly
you
tier
go.
list.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. There you go. Hashtag plugs.
Yeah. But
Um,
actually, when we talk about having to take a break, one thing that I really want to stress too, when we talk about taking a break from the game, it doesn't always mean shut your computer down and go touch grass. Okay,
Right.
sometimes it does. But for me, I've had a number of points in the game when I've been playing like a lot of best of one standard ranked.
Oh,
And I've just been
why would
playing
you do
a
that to
ton.
yourself?
I don't know. And that's actually the funny thing. I have found when I do best of one a lot, and it's funny because a lot of time I'll do it as a content creator because I feel like the games need to be quick and I need to keep churning
Right.
through games. But I have found I personally enjoy best of three significantly more.
Oh yeah.
Because
best of
your
three is
skill
so much
is
better.
more relevant. Your sideboarding decisions, like everything,
The
the
game's so
game
much
is so much more
slower paced.
complex.
This
It's
is
so
what
much
Garfield
slower.
intended.
Yeah.
Garfield, this is
exactly.
the way he intended the game to be
Yeah.
played.
Yeah,
Best
of
of one is, a lot of people say it's not real Magic.
Well, it's just
Yeah, and
Arena's play style for a while, right? Like, I used to play a lot of best of one, but one of my viewers actually asked me to play best of three, and I never looked back because I remembered like how much better, like sideboarding is. Like you're right, like your decisions matter so much more, and like the pace is slower
there's so many
because you're
more
gonna
of
have to
them
play
in a
3
match.
games,
Yeah.
like and like if you do hit a good matchup, it feels good because then now you get to play it, twice in a row and kind of just beat it or whatever, or have more confidence if you're on the play, like however which way you want to look at it. And yeah, I mean, there's so many like different things I think that you can kind of take from this discussion overall in terms of like how you need to approach the game, any of our listeners. But another topic that we actually wanted to essentially add on to this is kind of like how each one of us approaches deck building. Now, the first thing that we're actually going to talk about before we jump into this is something that OhOneNine actually talked about earlier, which was the difference between tournament play and ladder play. Now, there's a really big difference because specifically our channel, PizzaBox, we host tournaments, right? We host 3 tournaments a month. So specifically, a lot of our content as well that you're going to see is going to be us on the ladder because that's the closest thing that we can get to in terms of competitive play. Now, there are going to be some big differences though, mostly because in a tournament setting, you're actually more likely to play against some of the same decks over and over again. Whereas the ladder, even though you'll hit a patch where you'll see a specific tier 1 deck maybe like one too many times, but a lot of the time you actually see a varied amount of decks because there's a lot of decks that most people wouldn't really take to like a 7-round tournament, right? To expect to win, or a 10, one of our 10-round tournaments to expect to take down, right? Go like 9-1 with like your homebrew Omnath deck that no one else has come up with somehow or something, right?
Except for my Golgari Elves deck that so close. We were so close.
So close.
Yeah. But it's still hard, like at the end of the day, like a lot of what comes down to tournament magic is specifically tied to the first thing that we talked about, of knowing all the cards in the format that you're playing, knowing all the decks that you're pretty much going to see, what most of the stock lists look like, what most of the sideboard look like. And on top of that, like our tournaments are online, as most tournaments on Melee obviously are, and you're going to have access to open deck lists. So you automatically get to see what you're up against first and kind of get to plan your mulligan decisions, already be thinking about how you're going to sideboard, like what you're going to be playing against certain strategies. Whereas on the ladder, you're like, oh, I'm mulligan. Yeah, okay, I kept a 2-lander, really hoping to draw my third, and they're like mountain, and you're already like ready to shoot yourself because you know it's just gonna be like Kumano's the enchantment, the saga, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, Robber the Rich. Oh, I guess I just lose because I kept a sketchy
Why do
hand,
they always
but...
have Kumano? Like, anyway.
No, okay,
Yeah.
That's great.
Sorry,
So,
another. Yeah, no,
no,
sorry. That's,
excellent.
yeah.
No, thank you. That's a
So
perfect segue.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of like different
I'll
I think big differences from tournament
Mhm.
to ladder play, whereas like tournament you actually know what you're more likely to see. It's a lot harder to see some random jank, whereas the ladder, like, you don't really know what's gonna happen. And on top of that, like, what I actually think a lot of people fail to like realize or fail to notice is that in a tournament setting, the person who wins doesn't lose. They lose like once or twice, maybe, depending on how many rounds are in the tournament, right? Like our tournaments, a lot of the time, most of the time, people are undefeated or one loss, because sometimes even having like a second loss could be kind of tough to even make in like top 8. But let's say it's like a GP, you know, maybe you could get in with your second loss as well, and then you know maybe you get to the finish line, but it's still going to be a lot more of a harder trek. Whereas the ladder, you're necessarily all you're really losing is rank. A tournament, once you hit a certain point of losses, you're essentially eliminated from hitting prize money, hitting quote unquote contention. Whereas ladder, you're just like jumping on the queue, gonna go back again, jumping on the queue, gonna go back again, jumping on the queue, gonna go back again. You're kind of like not really like getting necessarily all the breaks that you need to get in between, or even necessarily kind of like, it does go back to adding on to what I said earlier, where you're not gonna see the same things over and over again. So now you're kind of like putting yourself in like this awkward situation of expecting to win against just random stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly why when you're watching a tournament, like you'll watch the number of players drop, you know, as the tournament progresses. Like first 2 rounds, you usually won't see many people drop. At the moment you hit that third round, if somebody went 0-2, there's a good chance they're just gonna leave and go about the rest of their day.
Yeah.
Because
I'm
like
out.
mathematically, the
Chance to
chances
make
of
it.
me, yeah, even if they're not like eliminated, like the chances are so rough and so low. It's like there's no point in continuing, which is why if we have in a tournament with, I don't know, just for example, like 100 people signed up, by the time we get to the last round before top 8, a lot of the time we're looking at 20 who are still there, you know, because the people who have a shot or people who want to like just stick around and just jam some games in a fun competitive environment. You see that, like some people who are still sitting around who would have like 3-4 losses. They know they're not making top 8, but they want to finish this Wiz. I get that. I respect that. Yeah, but that comes back to trying to get, you know, knowing what you're trying to get out of the game. You know, is like what are you doing this for the experience of participating, or are you trying to win it? You know, and
yeah, I mean, you look at it. Yeah, okay. So the other thing we had talked about with tournaments versus the ladder, and I think you had alluded to it, Pizza, was, you know, the availability of the deck list. So, you know, we have the ability to assess what's out there and what's available. You're able to in real time with the client that we use for the tournaments. You're able to look at your opponent and make real-time game decisions based on the cards that they have. Whereas with, you know, for the majority, the funny thing is, you know, we're talking about, you know, a bunch of old farts here talking about how we enjoy best of 3 in some of these older formats, you know, Explore and things like that. The overwhelming majority of people are doing 2 things. They're playing best of 1, they're playing standard, and they're playing on mobile. This may seem foreign to us and probably foreign to the majority of people that are listening, but you need to understand that we are not the majority and that the overwhelming majority of them are doing exactly that. Best of 1, standard, mobile. It might even be the first time they download the game. This is the majority of the content that is out there on MTG Arena. So it warps the way in which the game is kind of perceived, and it does result in impacts to the changes to the game that maybe the rest of us might see as kind of bizarre or doesn't make sense. But you got to remember, the old guard were a very small minority of folks that have been playing this game since, you know, even the 2000s. Even if you've just been playing since, you know, I don't know, original Innistrad, you're in the minority because the overwhelming majority are young kids who are downloading this game for the first time, playing best of 1 standard on their phone or on, you know, their mom's tablet. So this is not this is something you have to consider when you're approaching Arena in particular. It does not represent the same thing. And that also kind of goes back to what you're talking about burnout is you had mentioned about looking at other content. It's a great way to take a break from it is looking at not just from the kind of a mental break, but also learning little tidbits about things the game that you maybe had missed. And also kind of seeing different play patterns and insights to the game that you missed. Again, I've been playing this game for nearly 30 years and I'm learning every single day. I'm no means an expert and I think I'm still learning. And I think the moment that you think you've solved this game, right? That's why we play it. It's been around for 3 decades because it's unsolvable. Every single time you approach a new game with a new opponent with a random set of 60 cards or 75 cards in best of 3, there's so much variation, so much randomness that it does make it infinitely interesting.
Absolutely. And that's, yeah, I couldn't have said it better, man. That's perfect. And you're absolutely right. The example of the game constantly kind of shifting and the fact that nobody's solved it. Like, it's funny when
Right.
people say like, oh, format's been solved. It's like, no, it hasn't. Never has. Like,
No format has ever been solved.
No format has ever been solved. And they just haven't, because there's always something else you can do. And the example of that I find so fascinating in recent standards has been Naya Runes. I think that deck is fascinating because there are some days, and if you log on to the
early in
arena
the season,
ladder
that
right
deck
now,
crushed, right? Like early in the season, it looked like that deck was going to get a ban like immediately.
Oh yeah, no, it was absolutely dominant. Well, and we saw decks that are running white and black that have a lot of good exile-based removal that can hit cheap stuff. With cards like Vanishing Verse and those types of things, all of a sudden really like became much more prevalent because they could answer things like the Kami of Transience or Unforged Champions that were getting so huge. But I found it really fascinating watching the format evolve over the last year or so, because we had, major pros standing by. I mean, we had, I think it was the Kamigawa Set Championship. I believe the entire Japanese testing team brought Naya Runes for the standard event. I mean, that's a big freaking deal. Like, they could, like, they clearly had done their research and understood the metagame and knew that this was a powerhouse that could be beaten. Well, a whole bunch of other people brought mono white and completely dump trucked it.
Right.
Like they completely
Thalia.
devastated it.
Just Thalia.
Yeah, Thalia. Just, oh my god. Yeah, Thalia are kind of a Myria. It's over. Like the rune deck is just completely shut off if those hit the field. And then there was this period, especially on the ladder, I noticed shortly after that event, I didn't see Naya Runes anywhere.
Right.
And so like the next couple of events, Naya Runes was nowhere to be found. And we're seeing it pop up again. Like, some people are now, because
it's like
people
a cockroach.
aren't running the mono white deck that shut it down anymore.
Right. Yeah, because mono white has given way to Boros aggro, which is, it takes many of the same cards, but it takes a very different approach.
It has some reach too, like the burn spells help, right?
Right. And
true.
The mono white deck that was out there during that era it wasn't a Taxus deck. It was not. We talk about, Thalia and Archon. Those are Taxus cards, but it was not a Taxus deck. That was like sideboard. I mean, I think main board it ran 2 Thalia. I mean, I ran 2 in mine.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't run more than that. And honestly, and we've talked about this before, Ham, on broadcast for the PizzaBox tournaments, is I'm not a fan of, unless a card is pivotal to the combo that you're trying to accomplish or pivotal to your win condition, I don't like running more than 3 of legendary spells, regardless of what they are, unless they have a very core responsibility for you winning the game. That even includes things like Chandra, Torch of Defiance, which I mean, I don't know, if you're running a Rakdos deck, you're not running Chandra. What are you doing? But even then, 3 is enough. And
yeah, so most only run 2 main deck, I think.
Yeah. And so with those, like, that deck answered Naya, and then I think what you were getting at, Ham, is it's kind of this like the ebb and flow where, okay, one answer comes about, and then the response is, okay, now that mono white has kind of shut off Naya, not shut off, Naya Runes is still it still is a very good deck.
Yeah.
But kind of tempered its ability to just run off and be unbeatable. Then it was like, okay, now that Naya Rooms isn't there so much, why don't we shift Mono White over to Boros, because it's quicker, right? Because it has all those hasty creatures, and it has that immediate interaction to clear the path with red spells that can get rid of any blockers that may be there. And then what's the answer? It's the old triangle of control, control combo aggro, right? So then coming in behind it, and correct me if there's a deck in the meantime that I missed, but then Hinata comes in and says, well, what I'm going to do is beat you all on pace in order to be able to resolve a spell that does 4 damage, taps all your things, that makes a 4/4.
It does like 6 things.
Does
On
like
your
6
upkeep,
things.
no less. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's
on
because-
your turn, time walking you out of the game. pretty
Because
much,
unless
like-
you're able to resolve, unless you're able to go, Hinata hits the board, you immediately need either a Skyclave Apparition or a Brutal Cathar. We're talking standard here.
Yeah.
You have no answers. I mean, they do also run, I guess, the 2 of instant that says destroy a creature with toughness 4 or greater. Whatever.
Valor stance, yeah.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah.
Most of those decks run a 1 of, or at least in the sideboard. But yeah, it's just interesting. I don't really have a definitive point here. More so just that the ebb and flow of, okay, we've solved this, now on to the next thing. Now we've solved that. And I will say also, there was a time not that long ago, as recently as about 2019, where Standard was not healthy. Standard was and there were a series of bans, more than we had seen in the past, 10 plus years, where they were desperately trying to fix things. Adventures, Timur Ramp, Fires of Invention. I mean, I'm not even mentioning some of just the core cards that all came out of Throne of Eldraine with Oko, Into the Story, Veil of the Summer, all that stuff that all got banned. But Standard was not healthy. And the fact now that what we're talking about is that the game is able to shift based on the overwhelming input from people who are brewing to try and solve things should be an indication that the format is healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. And actually, this is a bit of an aside, but I find it somewhat fascinating that Arena has been successful as it is, because it's like, here is this client. It is designed so you can play Standard at home.
Right.
Everybody can play Standard from their home. Like, Standard was the format that they really pushed on Arena initially, and it was in that time, like you're saying, like within the first year of Arena dropping, Eldraine showed up, and you're right, Standard was rough.
It was not in a healthy state. Ironically, for me personally, just anecdotally, that was when I made a serious shift right around there when Throne of Eldraine was in Standard rotation. I did not play Standard that much. When Adventures were the key deck, I was like, okay, let's see what Historic is about. And that's where my love of kind of the expanded format of Historic started to begin. And now that we have both Explore and Historic, and Alchemy for that matter, I do think it's, and back then, I don't know if you guys remember, when Wednesdays were Historic Brawl Day. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do remember that. Yeah.
When they would give it to us once a week, and I was like, "What? Why is this once a week? Like, what is the story of this?"
That was rough.
No, I remember when they did like 1 week where it was like, okay, Historic Brawl's open this week. I was like, everybody get out there, show them the data, let them know we want that.
Right.
Get in there, play jam games in Historic Brawl. Yeah, and then shortly thereafter they did open it up as a yes, no, it was a Wednesday thing. That's right. Yeah,
I actually have a crazy stat for you guys. Since you mentioned bannings, as of the release of Dominaria United on the 9th of September, there will be no cards banned in Standard for the first time since January 2017. 5 years. So it'll be 5 years since there's no cards on the ban list. I just want you to take that in right now. I know we're kind of going off topic a little bit, but I know you just think about that. Like 5 years it's been in a format that I remember being like sacred, and oh my god, if a ban happens, then all these bad things with Magic are happening because Jace is banned, Stoneforge is banned. We just banned all the artifact lands. Skull Clamp's been out for a month and we immediately have to ban it. Lingering Souls is banned and limited. Like, we got like all these crazy cards that just like get banned all the time. Like, and obviously a lot of the examples I'm using are old timey, but it really does, like, that's what Standard used to be. Standard used to be this place where you know, no bans happened, and you know your cards are
Right.
safe. But over the last
Mhm.
apparently 5 years, none of your cards
It's
have really
the
been all that safe because
well,
if you're playing the
you
best thing, it's probably going to get banned.
you know what it is the fire
Mhm.
methodology that they're using for developing. I mean, Throne of Eldraine was fire to a T, and I think a little bit to Throne of Eldraine. It's so
I had
weird.
fires
Throne
in
of
it.
Eldraine.
The
Yeah.
fires
Yeah,
is a
dude.
busted card.
I was gonna say,
You know.
Theros Beyond Death was, I think, the beginning of the fire campaign. It might have been
Oh
shortly
yeah,
before that.
Uro.
I,
Uro single handedly in
Yeah,
Crocs.
Earl.
Just like
that's what I'm saying.
you know,
And
Uro's
Yeah,
so
Shadowspear was in there
messed
too.
up.
Amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing stuff was in that set.
Shadowspear.
And
So
Yeah,
Uro,
Uro is. Yeah.
Heliod.
yeah,
Heliod was like an
Yeah. Oh,
accidental combo
Heliod.
piece with Walking Ballista and
But what's
Trike
funny
and
is,
all
and
that.
I don't know if you guys, it's one of my favorite sets because it's kind of a goofy, it's enchantment based, and there's a bunch of
Mhm.
goofy interactions. There are a couple of bombs, Uro, Shadowspear, Crux, Heliod, stuff like that. But besides a handful of bombs, the set was super low power. It was one of these
Mhm.
stratified decks or stratified sets that you don't really see that often, where the bottom end was trash,
Mhm.
commons, uncommons, and many of the rares were trash. And then all the way at the top, you had, like we mentioned, some of those Titan gods, whatever, that were just mega broken, and there wasn't much in the middle.
Mhm.
Whereas Throne of Eldraine, which followed it, was
Every card is
just
like gas. Like the
gas.
commons, like
Everything
you
Oh, they're
read
from
all
the
bad.
top to
commons and
bottom.
you're like,
Yeah.
how is this a common? You're like, this card would be like either like an uncommon or a rare in some sets, you know? Like
Oh
you're like,
yeah.
oh, like
Yeah.
Adventure. I
Like,
remember I came back
like
into the game when
yeah.
Adventure when that set came out, and I read Adventure and I was like, dude, these cards are all broken. They're all like 3-for-1s. Like, what is going on?
Yeah. And then Lucky Clover's a 2-mana
Yeah.
uncommon.
Yeah, that doubles all
Let's
your.
That just doubles them.
let's go ahead and
And
make that.
Edgewell Innkeeper, every time you cast one, you just draw a card. Again, uncommon for 1. What?
Yeah, that card's like a rare. In like 1995, like
Mhm.
that card's like insta banned, or I guess more
Right?
realistically, it'd be like 2001. Maybe like that card would
Yeah.
be like an
Yeah.
onslaught as like an elf, and you'd be like, oh, we
Onslaught.
play it with Skull Clamp, and every time we cast our elves, and we draw cards, and it's just like, yeah,
It's
like
funny though
innkeepers
too.
shouldn't exist. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's funny too though, because there are some examples in Eldraine of cards that aren't that crazy. Like I think Wandermare is like one that comes to mind. It's the Selesnya horse that like every time you cast an enchantment, you put a +1/+1, or every time you cast an adventure, like it gets +1/+1 till end of turn or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like meh. That's just it doesn't really matter. You also have like there's a tree folk. There's the Garenbrig Carver was another one. It was like a really
Oh my
bad
gosh.
like sorcery speed combat trick, and then you got like a
Yeah.
2/3 body for 4. I remember thinking like, oh, if more of these adventures were costed like this, it wouldn't be that bad.
Well,
And
if
and
it was
course,
more of a limited like type of ability, it wouldn't be that
exactly,
bad.
it'd be
Right.
Or
great.
Right.
limited
Yeah.
mechanic, but instead they were just like, hey, I want one of each color to have like this ridiculous like
Yeah.
2-mana removal
Mhm.
spell attached to like an
Yeah.
on-rate body. And then
Yeah.
I also want like a couple other rare ones that can just get some cards out of your sideboards. Oh yeah, no, how about a 2-mana colorless card that doubles
Yeah.
all of
Well,
them?
I mean, and to this day, in Historic and Explorer, you can ask yourself, okay, is this card good? And the follow-up question is, does it die to Bone Crusher Giant? And instead,
Right.
like
Yep.
when Lotus Cobra was getting reprinted, I remember there were a whole bunch of people who were like, "Holy cow, they're reprinting Lotus Cobra! What are they thinking?" And then followed by everybody else is going, "But you can just stomp it." Like,
Yeah, it's
just,
probably just gonna
Yeah.
die.
I mean,
and
the
sure
old
enough, it wasn't a big deal. Like it was
Yeah.
fine in a certain decks, but it didn't like set the
Right.
the standard format ablaze or anything.
the old saying,
Yeah.
of course, that we all know is you bolt the bird, but of course we
Mhm.
don't have lightning bolt. But the concept there is bolt check, shock check, and then I don't know what I guess we would call the 4-cost spell, but most things the answer is does it shock check, bolt check. And so Cobra
Nowadays, it's
fails the
push.
shock check,
Yeah.
much like
Yes.
the bolt check. And of course, as soon as you see it, it's one of those things, the concept of bolt the bird,
Mhm.
for those who are new to Magic or whatever, is the concept that if you see a mana ramp spell, mana birds, excuse me, birds of paradise,
A mana creature that taps for
you
mana.
do not hesitate because you
Oh,
will
no.
be punished.
Mhm.
If you think to yourself, oh, maybe I'll allow this to go one turn, and then I'll recover from it after I resolve my thing, whatever it is I want to do. No, you bolt the bird, and you don't ever second guess yourself on it because you will be punished if you don't.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. And that's actually why like I'm running a lot in a lot of my decks right now. I'm specifically putting in, you know, 1 mana instant speed removal spells of one kind or another. Like in a lot of my standard decks right now that have red, and I'm running Flame Blessed Bolt because like you see those 1-drops, and in that case we're talking like Shambling Ghasts and things like that.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
okay, then we're not necessarily talking like dedicated, but in Explorer Historic you have Llanowar Elves, you have Elvish Mystic, you have Gilded Goose, all of those. Like you need to have some kind of answer for them. So if you have a Fatal Push in hand and your opponent hits a Gilded Goose, just take it out. Yep, every time.
Voltage Surge is more of a popular one nowadays too in some of the sacrifice artifact heavy decks. Like, yeah, you got to make sure that you deal with some of these like early cards that essentially kind of help your opponent, because you also have to think, well, let's say that you don't kill the Llanowar Elf, but they don't have any other real like lands outside of the next one they're going to play. So now you've actually let your opponent get ahead, when in reality you could have just killed the Llanowar, they play their land, and then now they don't draw a land for another couple turns and you win just because you killed the Llanowar Elf. Like,
100%.
And we're seeing that replayed now in Explorer. There are so many decks because it wasn't even that recently, but it was historic, but now it's also an Explorer. It's one of those interesting cards that was introduced in a anthology that predated Explorer, was Collected Company. And pretty much if you run any creature-based deck, you're going to be running Collected Company. And if you're not, you're hurting yourself, because the fact that it's an instant speed is insane. It's actually, there is an argument out there that it's an unfair card because of the fact that it's an instant speed, but I think it's the right choice because otherwise control would run amok, and I think it's the right answer to be able to put them in check, to be able to at instant speed hold it until the end of their turn. Coco, if they want to counter it, they're tapped down. Guess what? Now you get to actually play stuff back on your turn. Everyone's seen that line before, but it's critical.
It's fair enough. Like, I think the reason it's fair enough is because we've all been in this situation where we're like, all right, yeah, Coco, 1 Llanowar. And you're like, all right, well, I guess I just lose anyways, because now I just tapped out for a 1 mana 1/1 that just taps for mana at the end of my opponent's turn. So
sure,
yippity doo. I think that there's a lot of like a downside to some cards like that.
But at the same time, I mean, you have plenty of turns as well where you're hitting 6 mana worth of creatures that are entering the battlefield all in one go. And that you feel like $1 million when
Steel
Leaf.
It just feels so good. Let's go.
So good.
With the henge out, you're just like going in
with the
and drawing some cards.
Henges. I mean, there we go. Throne of Eldraine again.
Throne of Eldraine. Yep.
I've said this in the past, and I'll say it again. And someone who has been played since the late 90s, I do believe that Throne of Eldraine will go down in history as the most powerful set, because we used to do blocks, and we can talk about that another time. We won't do it here. We can talk about the difference between blocks versus the new model, which is to just pump out content fast. It's whizzing past you. Sometimes you lose track. You're like, didn't something just come out? Oh, that's right. A new alchemy set just came out, and we're looking here. What is it? September 9th. We're looking at another set, and it's going to be standard legal with rotation. But back in the day of blocks, I would say that Throne of Eldraine will go down in history as the most powerful block set, since the Urza's block from the late 90s.
As an individual set, it's probably the most powerful set by itself. Obviously, there's going to be more cards in it than the previous blocks where they were split up into 3
Urza's Saga
sets.
Sure, those
Urza's
are pretty
Destiny, Urza's Legacy.
But,
I
agree with that. I actually think so. I think that the cards in the Urza block are more broken in what they do, but I think that per rate, each individual card in Eldraine is more powerful than Urza's block, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like the average power level of a card in Eldraine, I think
is higher. But the cards that are more messed up in Urza's are more messed up. Like Academy, Time, I forget what it is, the one that untaps everything and you redraw 7, just like pretty much Time Twister for like 6 mana.
Right. I was also going to say, obviously, things like Gaia's Cradle, Gilded Drake.
Yeah, Gaia's Cradle. Those cards are messed up, but if you think about it, like your commons and uncommons were kind of trashy, right? You still had like 1990 whatever magic, or so your average, like Like Troll, you have Albino Troll. Like that's not even like a good card anymore. That's like it's pretty much a 4-mana 3/3 that regenerates. It's kind of like trash.
Right.
You would never play that now. But Eldraine, you know, you actually have like 2-mana 3/3s with abilities, right? So like per average, I think that Eldraine is a more powerful set. But Urza's and some of the older sets, obviously Dark Ritual, Lightning Bolt, Ancestral Recall, like all these other cards are obviously more broken individually. And I think that that's actually what the difference is between, like, I think old Magic and new Magic. Old Magic has specific cards that can withstand the test of time. But new Magic, every time they print something, the average power level is like higher, right? So then now the cards that are older have to be like straight up studs, right? They have to be like your literal, like, oh, you play this in your deck no matter what, like your Lightning Bolts, your Path to Exiles, your Fatal Pushes, your Thought Seizes would be the examples, like an Explorer, and Standard would be like Iteration, Voltage Surges, kind of like some of your like average removal spells, like your meat and potatoes type cards. But like I think that like it's kind of crazy to think how much different Magic is now in comparison to those sets, right? Like we've come such a long way, but it's interesting to see what cards have actually stood the test of time, because a lot of what ends up happening specifically in like a spoiler season, this kind of ties into what's happening right now. You know, Dominaire's coming out, everybody's going to be like, oh, these cards and that cards, and but the specific thing that even we do here on the channel, that I usually kind of like to get out of the way first is I see a card that looks like an old card, and I automatically get that out of the way. Okay, this looks like this card that used to happen.
Sure. Yeah.
But now that
Workshop Warchief. Yeah, it's new Thrag Test.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Now that we've assessed
or like
that,
what was it? Play with Fire is a direct replacement for Shock.
Yeah, like a Shock.
100%.
Yep. So now that we've assessed that, essentially you already have like an opinion on the card, but you actually have to like take that opinion away, because you have to realize that the game state, the format, everything is different than when Thragtusk was legal. There's no restoration. Cards
are better. Thragtusk out of this. All right, that's a great card.
Well, I'm just thinking, because when Workshop Warchief came out, a bunch of people were like, "Oh, they're basically reprinting Thragtusk in the standard," and it's like that card doesn't really see play. You know, like maybe like in mono greenless or like some ramp situations, it might still be okay.
Right.
But even with the blitz mode, which does make it really, like, that is a nice benefit.
That's a lot of value.
Gotta love it.
A lot of value.
It's a lot of value. It is. It really is. But at the same time, would I rather blitz in a work? But would I rather blitz in a Workshop Warchief for 6, or ramp a little bit more in the early game and hit a Titan of Industry on 7?
That just ends the game.
Know?
You get a 3 for
exactly. It's just like, And
anyway, I think that's like the big difference, though. You're right. That's like that card specifically is the best example of, we can look at it and we can be like, oh man, you know, I remember when Thragtusk was in, and oh man, Junk Rights, and oh man, Crate a Hoof, and you go crazy over like this old standard that used to exist, but then like you remember that that's not like the standard of today, and every single card is an Omnath, Locus of Creation, or whatever it's called. Like every single card has a draw card. It has to like somehow cheat on mana. It has to have another comes into play effect, and then it also has to have like a continuous like card advantage engine by itself, pretty much. Like it has to have one of these 3 things, or if it happens to have 2 out of the 3 and you play it and it doesn't die, you like snowball the game out of control. Whereas like Workshop Warchief, you're like, 5/3 with trample and I gain some life, and you're like, ooh, but if it dies, and you're like kind of in that situation of like the upside to that card is you hoping that your opponent does something that's actually negative for you. So like in that instance, you like realize that, okay, that card isn't good anymore, because that's not how Magic is now. Magic used to be like, oh, they're gonna have that 1 removal, so if they kill my creature, at least I got some value. Now it's like, I play a creature, it does like 6 things, and then they kill it, and then they feel bad, because I still got my 6 things, you know, like it doesn't really make a difference. In recent
history, you can look at the fact that Siege Rhino was reprinted, and I almost feel like Wizards did that. I want to believe that someone at R&D did that to to pretty much emphasize exactly what you're talking about. Thragtusk, Siege Rhino, all those cards from that era, they were dominant in their time, but now they don't have a place in the modern Fire method of printing cards, because
everything's a Siege Rhino.
They're fair cards, and you can't print fair cards in 2022. You cannot, because you're gonna get answered by a card that is
Fable.
faster.
You're just gonna play Fable, and then you're just gonna lose because they got to cycle through their deck. They made 2 different creatures. They also generate mana, and then
Yeah. Or they're going to, in
Like,
response to you, trying to turn it sideways, they're going to play a Wandering at instant. You're going to play Planeswalkers at
Planeswalkers at
instant
instant
speed.
speed with
And
upside. Like,
you're going to be, you tell someone from 2013 that they're going to play a Planeswalker at instant speed and exile your best thing,
and
and
gain
it's
2
still
life.
going to be alive. And the next turn, it's going to make a token, and lunacy, absolute lunacy. So
Yeah.
I almost feel like in the most recent anthology set for Historic and Explorer that they put Siege Rhino in there to make old farts like us realize that those cards are unplayable, because I'll tell you, I tried.
Yeah, I played that card a bit. It's hard.
It's there. You can do a little bit of like Abzan Blink stuff.
Yeah.
Because but the problem is, guess what? If you want to play any of the good ephemerate spells, you have to dig into Historic. And if you're in Historic, you're facing a mono red deck that's nearly unbeatable. You're facing an Azorius control
Blink the
deck.
key. You're better off blinking the key. You get more value off of blinking
100%.
that. And there's way more broken things than just being like 4 mana, 4/5 with trample, and when it comes into play, you drain them for 3. And you're like, yeah. Like back in the day, that was nuts because you played 2 or 3 of those rhinos. They probably lost that game because removal wasn't like keeping up with that, and every other creature wasn't a rhino. But nowadays, every creature is a rhino that does like a continuous effect. And
that's the other thing. I mean, just think about, we haven't talked at all about alchemy yet today, but think about this.
My goodness,
you spend 1 more mana and you get that stupid the witches, what is it, the cauldron, from alchemy, the most recent card, the
Hourglass Coven that puts like 9 power across 3 different creatures on the board, all with the same art for some reason. Anyway, you
spend 1 more mana and you get that. And in addition to getting that, it has, as you were talking about, those perpetual effects where one of the options is they discard a card every turn. One of the other options is you drain them for 2 every turn. One of the other options is, it's just ludicrous. And
it's absolutely insane.
I honestly do believe that they reprinted Siege Rhino as like an affront to this idea that old Magic still has a place in 2022. And it's sad, right? Because fair Magic used to exist. And I don't think fair Magic exists anymore.
Explorer doesn't have all the cards that Pioneer has, so I can almost see an argument for them maybe thinking that and Tireless Tracker could potentially make a deck that doesn't exist right now, and maybe like someone who plays Explorer could play that deck until Pioneer becomes Pioneer, and then maybe now there's even more different options that they can kind of gravitate towards rather than like the Siege Rhino Tracker aspect. But I think that it ended up kind of almost like backfiring, at least for people who wanted to think that stuff was good, because you end up trying it out and it just like feels, you're right, it just feels bad. It's just so like it's just so outdated. Those cards aren't good anymore. Like they're not
too fair.
Every new set is better. Literally every new set that they print is better. Like Kamigawa was the best example of, you make a great point. Like I talked about Fable, you talk about Emperor. It's like these 2 cards alone make it in like Explorer and Standard to the point where you kind of have to play them in like the decks that they're available to because they're the best cards you can play. Fable's insane. Almost every deck splashes red because it gives you Bone Crusher and it gives you Fable. Rakdos is the best because it automatically gets access to both. And then on top of that, all your cards either kill something or, they're like a 3-for-1. You got like even Graveyard Trespasser's a card that up front, you read it and you're like, oh, it's just a 3-mana 3/3, and okay, yeah, you get to ping them for 1. When in reality, every time I play it, I'm like, all right, sweet, they have to at least use 2 cards to kill this.
Yeah,
they have to get rid of a good card out of their hand potentially to get rid of this card. On top of that, I'm going to be attacking. I can pass. It'll turn into a 4/4. Now it gets to exile 2 cards, deal them 2, like etc. etc. Like,
that was going to be my point. The next point is, how hard are they to interact with? In Graveyard Trespass is a good example of that. Fable's a good example of that too. Because I mean, what are some cards? Like, what are some individual cards that can deal with everything Fable the Mirror Breaker does?
Well, I don't want to, I'll just briefly mention back at the beginning here, we had talked about the fact that if a card sees immediate insertion into a legacy format, it's a sign that it's broken. And I'll tell you that people are playing Fable the Mirror Breaker in legacy right now.
And vintage.
And that should be alarming because a standard card that is printed and Yeah, the thing is, it's diversity. I think, Ham, you and I had talked about when we were commentating on the top 8, round 8 and top 8 for the tournament just recently here on Sunday. The thing that makes Rakdos mid-range and Explore, and also what just makes Fable the Mirror Breaker, because they're together there, so difficult to answer, is it does everything. So you immediately have an enchantment saga that produces a creature, and then turn 2 you get to loot for 2, and then you have a creature that you must answer, because if you have anything large that you're able to duplicate with the effect, it's value city. Value city for sure.
It creates 2 separate permanents on the field, and if the Goblin Shaman somehow survives to the point where the Reflection of Kiki Jiki flips over, it then effectively combos with itself by giving you a card that you can copy with it's bonkers. And on top of that, we're talking about a standard where, you know, things like Titan of Industry are legal, and Blood Tithe Harvester is another phenomenal one.
Let's just copy the best creature.
Yeah.
Just copy the best creature in the
copy
format.
The best creature. Yep.
Easy,
100%. Man, I can't wait for that little guy to rotate. But anyway,
that card's gonna leave. So
Yeah,
let's kind of bring it back a little bit here. We went off a little bit, but we actually had a lot of good things that I think people who essentially can add on to what this whole podcast is getting around to. You know, we're talking a lot about how to deal with specific cards and talking a lot about knowing the cards in the format. I mean, we know these cards so much that we already automatically have these cards in our mind when we get to the deck building part. Now, 2 different aspects of the deck building come between the tournament and ladder, and overall a lot of it has to do with like your main deck, and then a little bit more of it has to do with the sideboard, specifically because in best of 3 you're going to see the sideboard, whereas in best of 1, so in best of 1 you're almost more focused to having a more linear strategy, because you're just trying to do your thing the best that you can do and most efficiently before your opponent's trying to do it. You're probably going to have a couple to 4, maybe I would say probably 2 to 6 interaction spells. Most decks probably play like 2 to 4, probably, if you're more like a hyper aggressive deck. You're mostly just trying to like crash in and be on the play, things like that, or maybe like gain like block and then kind of turn it around on your opponent if you're like on the draw, etc. But essentially that's like the main difference. Like when you're building for the best of 1 situation, you're mostly just like being linear, focused on one strategy. When you're doing best of 3, you actually have these sideboards, right? You have your 15 card sideboard that essentially in games 2 and 3 give you access to cards that can make your matchup better, or even better than it already is. Because I think people kind of get a misconception of sideboarding where they think that sideboarding is all your bad matchups. In reality, sometimes you're willing to there's something that O1 talked about earlier, which was, I'm playing mono black, so I know that I have a better chance against these specific decks on the ladder. And that actually is kind of like how sideboarding actually works too, where sometimes you actually are okay taking that loss to that one deck just because you know you're not going to see it as often, so that's okay. So now you can actually take those potentially 2 to 3 sideboard slots that you would think you need to put in to make that matchup better and actually make an already good matchup like way more winnable, right? You can put yourself from like a 60% win rate against a deck to maybe more like a 70-75 if you're including those 3 additional cards that already help you like go over the top of already what you're doing to your opponent.
Right.
And I think that people mostly forget that, right? You're always just like, I throw the automatic 4 duresses in, I throw the automatic, negates in, Dovin's vetoes. But in reality, those cards are probably good against everything, but you really have to focus on what your deck is weak against and plan in that strategy. And that's specifically for best of 3.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's important to assess. Yeah, I think what you just said about the fact that a sideboard is only for bad matchups or matchups that you look at and you're like, oh, I'd prefer if that weren't the thing. Because if you're responding to your opponent, you've already lost. You need to come into your first 60 with an understanding of what the format is presenting to you. So you need to be looking at, as we mentioned in the beginning of this, for example, in the Explorer format, you need to understand what the format is already doing at the time in which you are developing your deck. Decks cannot be stagnant. People always ask me, ironically, on stream, why do you only have like 10 decks in MTG Arena? It's because they're dead. Like after a month, how you can't keep a deck for a month? It's dead. It's
every week something's different.
It's something has changed. Yeah, I
Every
mean,
day it's
I'm not
different
talking.
nowadays. The data.
Yeah, I'm not even talking about like new sets coming out. That's not even what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is your approach to answering something is already dead. If you think that that's the way in which it's going to resolve for you. So, anyways, yeah, be dynamic. Don't be worried to scrap things. Like I said, I get people ask questions all the time. Why do you only have a handful of decks in MTG Arena at any given time? It's because everything is a work in progress. Everything has to be a work in progress. Otherwise, you're dead because you're not responding to the meta of the game. And I think, Pizza, you had also mentioned, don't be afraid to reach out to resources beyond what you've seen just on the ladder. Go to YouTube, go to Twitter, look at what other people are doing. And I'm not
Read the
saying
free
just
articles.
copy it. I'm not just saying just copy what they're doing, and even though there's nothing wrong with that. What I'm saying is look at what they're doing, assess what you think they're doing right or wrong, make modifications to the way that you prefer to play your game, and then come up with an answer. That's all we're trying to do. All of us are trying to solve this eternal puzzle. And that's the way I approach Magic, right? We talked about that earlier, is this game that we all play and enjoy infinitely is a puzzle, an unsolvable puzzle. And all of us are trying our best at all times to try and solve it, even though we know there is no answer.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Well, and to kind of piggyback off that, yes, we need to be learning constantly. So yes, find other deck resources, find content creators that are producing the kind of information that you're intrigued by. Like find the folks who are producing the kind of decks that you like to play and see what they're doing, see what they're producing, but also find content creators and find thought leaders or people who share their decks on various websites. Find those folks who play the decks you don't like. And the decks you really don't like going up against.
Good point.
Watch those, see what they're up to and see what they do. And also if your collection is, in a state where you can play games with those decks that are your bad matchups that you're are not, that you struggle against. Like, man, if going up against control, if you just find yourself bashing against the wall and they always seem to have the counter spell and you can never quite figure it out, pick up that Azorius control list that is constantly whooping on you, take it out into the ladder a little bit and try it, because you will find it has way more weaknesses than you may think.
Yeah.
But you need to identify them. You need to know where the chinks in the armor are, and you will find that when you're playing with it or when you're studying it. If you're going onto the ladder and you see, I know like a great example of this, a card that's going to be rotating here shortly, Ruin Crab. Like there are people who, like, the moment the first turn is island, tap, Ruin Crab, they just scoop.
Sure.
And I've
done it.
Janky deck. Yeah, we've all been there. We've all had that night when like Mill is like really hot on the ladder, and it's like, I just don't want to do this again. I get it. I do. But at the same time, if you want to understand how to beat Mill, play with the deck a little bit, because you might find that it doesn't have as much reach as maybe you think. Or it's really all in on that one strategy. Or simply put Ruin Crabs in any deck that has blue so you can get a couple free wins. I mean, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, just, there's nothing wrong with that.
Even if you're not playing a Mill deck, you lead with Ruin Crabs. Some people will scoop. Just throwing that out there.
That's right.
But yeah, knowing your enemy, I think, is actually like really important. And that's actually something that I kind of secretly, to a certain degree, try to say as like the channel. When I'm making content for YouTube, is I try to show off a bunch of different decks, right? Like I'm always trying to say, hey, here's the next competitive deck that you're going to see on the ladder. Or, if I do take a deck deep into Mythic or something like that, I'll make it like a sideboard guy for it. But overall, I think that being able to play the deck, and even if you're losing with it, at least lets you understand what type of strategies your opponent's trying to go for. So then when you're attacking the deck, it gives you a better chance of kind of like, almost like a Jedi mind tricking and kind of knowing where your opponent's going in the game, because you're going to be like, okay, well, they played a tap land, then they actually paid 2 life for their Rakdos, and they're passing, so stomp, right? Because there's a stop on arena, there's no permanence in play. So now I can automatically assume that they have an interaction spell that targets me, but they're not playing it. Or they have like a draw spell or something, maybe, right? Something weird like that. But that's less likely because you already know what most of the stock deck lists look like. So now you can say, okay, well, I untap, I play my second land. Do I want to play my 2-drop that I know is just going to die probably to this Bone Crusher? And then now they're going to untap, play the 4/3, and then now my opponent's pretty much swung the whole tempo in their favor. and then I feel bad because I'm the aggro deck, and then now
But
I just look like an idiot because I played into their game plan. You know what I mean? Like there's
yeah,
so much to that, right?
and in those great interactions, I mean, just okay to take that example, like, and run with it a little bit further. If you know your opponent, if you have good reason to believe your opponent has a Bone Crusher Giant in hand, and say you have like a Village Rites in your hand, then you could play out your Llanowar Elves, or you could play out your 2-drop, whatever it may be. If you have 1 black mana open and they target your creature with the Bone Crusher, you could then sacrifice the Village Rites to fizzle their Bone Crusher Giant. Like, that's a situation where if you know what they're going to do, you can look like you're playing into it and look like you're about to get got, and you could get them back because you know it's coming. And there are tons of situations where that kind of back and forth interplay happens, and that's why pros take so long on their turns, because they're going through
Right.
all of those scenarios.
Right.
Because
Yeah, assessing
they're
each
like,
situation.
yeah, there are an unending amount of them. Those little moments add up. And again, that comes down to knowing the cards, that comes down to knowing your opponent, knowing what cards you're likely to see, knowing some of the interactions, like being able to fizzle an adventure so that you deny them the creature. I
That's
mean,
huge.
That's
that's a
huge.
big
Yeah.
deal.
That's I love.
Like,
By the way, there's nothing better than in response to an opponent hitting something like a stomp or something like that. Also, whenever an opponent hits something that isn't an immediate sacrifice effect, because as we all know, you can't get underneath sacrifice. It is a non-interactable
yep.
effect. But if it's target creature you control such and such, oh, there's nothing better than tagging it with something cheap before they're able to hit that, and it fizzles. Oh, so good.
Oh yeah, no, and that's another thing where if your opponent plays like a Brazen Bar or a Stomp, and you like, sometimes the exact right play is to like hit your own thing with like an
Sure,
Infernal
right.
Grasp or a Fatal Push.
Yeah.
Like, that might be the correct play. Like, if that
Yeah.
Bone Crusher sticks, I'm dead. Well,
Right.
I'm gonna make sure it doesn't stick because you're trying
I
to
don't
get
have to
the
face
stomp off value.
We don't
I
need a
don't have to face
blocker in
3 in the
way.
air,
Mhm.
3 in the air or 4 on the ground. And I'll get rid of whatever it is that I have. I don't care about that because, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
what's funny is, if you had approached someone from even as recently as 6 years ago, before adventures were printed and before a lot of this
Mhm.
stuff, and you'd explain to them some of these lines. I mean, the game has become so insanely complex. I mean, I have friends who've come over from Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon, and this is not just like an ego boost thing for us Magic folk to try and like put ourselves above others. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But I'm saying objectively, Magic is the most complicated game, not even trading card game. There was a study that was done at Princeton about 8 years ago, and someone ran the analytics from it was a PhD student for mathematics, and it is far and away, not even close, far and away the most complicated game in the world because it has so much variance. It has so many options to it. And a little bit of an ego boost. So if you play this game, if you're one of the listeners here to the podcast, consider yourself among those who is at least intelligent enough to be able to play the game at some competent level, whether or not you're a big time winner, tournament winner, whatever. But the game is objectively insanely complex. And it also presents a little bit of a learning curve, which is why Arena has developed the way it has, with, as we mentioned earlier, things like best of one being introduced as the primary way in which the game is played by new players, because it doesn't have all these complexities, because they need to bring the game down to some core level for new players, and then for those of us who are interested in just seeing how far can we go in brewing and understanding this game, the levels. I mean, there's of course in the subreddit for spikes. I know I've never really cared for that name, by the way. It's always
Yeah.
been weird to me, but people who pursue Magic competitively, calling themselves Spike, whatever, it doesn't really matter. The point is, there is so much constant brewing and high level theory crafting that's going on for how the game should be played in whatever your preferred format is, that it can be daunting, and it is worth consideration about the level of complexity that you're encountering every time you play this game with your friends or online or whatever it may be.
So yeah, I think some of the core basic things, at least specifically for deck building, overall, I think that you want to make sure that you're following the type of strategy that you want to be doing. If you want to be an aggressive deck, make sure that you're putting cards in your deck that attack well. Make sure you're putting cards in that are cheap and efficient. The main thing about a deck specifically to always keep in mind is mana curve. you almost always in today's Magic want to be doing something on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. And then, once you get to turn 3 and up, you want to almost be doing like 2 things a turn, and then maybe even generating some card advantage on top of that to give you like a bit of a refuel to keep that tempo going. By essentially a way to do that is by making sure that your deck has, this many 1-drop spells, this many 2-drops, this many 3-drops, right? You can easily almost say, okay, 8 1-drops, or 10 1-drops. Okay, now we're going to do 6 2-drops. Okay, then, or maybe we have 6 3-drops and then we up the 2-drops if we're trying to be more of an aggressive deck. Okay, well then if you're a mid-range deck, maybe you specifically, let's say like Explorer, maybe you want to have more of your interactive cards be at 1. So maybe you
Right.
can cheat a little bit more on your 2-drops, knowing that most of your 1-drops are going to kind of help tie your game from turn 1 to 3, where on turn 3 you're going to start playing your Fables, your Graveyard Trespassers, your Royal Elementals, or whatever the some of the new cards is, the Angus, Spurges, all that stuff. Like,
Right, right,
having
right.
some of those just super, super cheap, efficient spells help you get
Mm-hmm.
to that middle or the combo part of your game plan. And I think that that's really important in recognizing what you need to get to that part of the game. Like, what is your deck trying to do?
Right.
How am I interacting with the meta game? How am I potentially interacting with the basic idea of, oh, if I play against an aggro deck, what am I really gonna do? Oh, if I'm playing
Mm-hmm.
against control blue X, what am I gonna do? If I'm playing against mid-range strategies that play essentially like all these card advantage cards, what do I do? What do I have some kind of graveyard hate for some of these combo decks? There's so many things that you have to take essentially into account, and that comes a lot with playtesting. You have to figure out what your deck is weak
Mm-hmm.
against. You have to figure out, what cards are good in my
Yeah.
sideboard that help me get a better advantage in potentially these worse matchups, or potentially some of these already winnable matchups that I want to improve on. I think that all these are the things that you definitely should be taking account into deck building, on top of what O1 and HamHocks have essentially like built a foundation on, in terms of like our essentially our ideology of like how we each are going to be approaching our own deck building. Because there's nothing wrong with neck decking. I mean, there's nothing wrong with picking up the deck, seeing why somebody played this specific 75 card deck list, finding out how certain cards synergize, finding out like what you lose against, maybe like playing each individual matchup, certain things like that. But I think that at the end of the day, you also have to like take what you see from all these popular strategies and all these popular decks, and kind of like adapt that to like what you think that you need to be getting out of Magic, and maybe kind of like add your own flair to it on top of that, if that's something that you like to do. Because we all, even though we all like to competitively like to play a lot of the same decks, and some of the cards, essentially you're like 4 to 5 cards different in almost everybody's main deck. Those
Right.
4 to 5 cards are actually like cards that end up adding a lot more flair, and essentially kind of show how you like to play the game, whether or not you want to be mid-rangier or you want to be more aggressive. Maybe I want to be more controlling. Maybe I want to play Gear Hulk and Opus, but then I also want to, make sure that I add white because I want to play Teferis and absorbs, because I still want to have a good control game plan. You know what I mean? Like, there's all kinds of
Yeah.
different ways to build decks. There's all kinds of different ways to play your strategy. And I think that if you're like a new player, I'm going to say it like this: if you're like a new player, essentially it's all about learning what you like, what you enjoy, and what your play style is. And if you're an already like enfranchised player like we are, essentially it's more about like making your already good skills better, and not getting burnt out on the game. And these are, I think, the 2 main things that you're going to want to take from today's podcast in terms of keeping your skills sharp and deck building.
Did you want to, by the way, since you mentioned that, did we want to segue into just kind of general advice for ladder climbing? Because I
Yeah,
think you're kind
exactly.
of
Yeah.
hinting. I think you're kind of hinting
Mm-hmm.
on uh, the kind of approach to. We had talked at the very beginning about just kind of, first of all, when you approach this game from their initial perspective, you need to establish some reasonable understanding of what you want to expect out of it, and whether that be that you want to pursue competitive gameplay in tournament based, like the PizzaBox hosts every other Sunday or every Sunday, depending on the month, or do you just want to grind the ladder? Do you just enjoy brewing? Right, nothing wrong
Mm-hmm.
with that. Some
Mm-hmm.
folks, honestly, myself included, there's some seasons where I'll get to platinum and I'm like, I'm gonna play a bunch of trashy decks. They're gonna have 40% win rate, but it's just fun.
You're speaking my language, man. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get to platinum, and then I'm gonna play some trash. There's other seasons, you know, and I've only made it to mythic about a half a dozen times, and when I did so, I had to grind on a certain either meta or anti-meta perspective. We had talked about that previously, where you assess what is being played in the format that you are interested in participating in, and you need to either choose to find one of those lanes that matches your preferred gameplay style, whether it be Rakdos mid-range, spirits, mono green, whatever in the example of explore, or you need to assess the majority of the meta decks that are out there and then say to yourself, what is the unifying factor? Is it a bunch of one drops like with the cat oven, spirit, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, maybe inclusion of Hiratsuko consumes all as a main board option is good because it has immediate removal for a bunch of things. Elvish Spirit Guide, or excuse me, Elvish Spirit Guide, Land of War Elf, a bunch of other things.
Tokens.
So, tokens, you may say to yourself, you know what? I'm looking at the meta right now, and there are a bunch of one-cost spells that are integral in them expanding beyond turn one. So even though Hiratsuko that consumes all is a 3-cost, and it does have Rakdos, so it might need a little bit more variance in the lands that you have available to you, that might be the right move for me if I want to advance in the ladder, because I can recognize the play patterns that are being played in the top 4 or 5 whatever decks, and I'm going to answer them from a holistic. And I think, like you were saying earlier, Pizza, is you're going to take some losses. If you're playing against the meta and your answer is Hiratsuko or whatever it is, this is an example, you're going to take some losses because you're going to lose to mono red. That damn robber of the rich. Oh my God. There is okay, I'll tell you right now, just anecdotally as an aside, there is no worse feeling than you're on the draw. And then it's mountain something with haste. It doesn't, some goblin. It doesn't matter. And then
or whatever,
turn, and then because your combo, you play a tap land or you play a triome or something, and then mountain number 2, robber of the rich. You're like, I have to climb out of such a deep pit here, and it always feels like they steal your like cultivate or something like that. You know,
they always take the 3-drop you needed. Exactly. Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ, can I
take your bone crusher
here?
You're like, I need a bone crusher, and they take it off the top of your deck, and you're like, oh well, that just feels bad.
Jesus Christ.
You're like, now I'm just giving them cards that they want to play.
No, I'm just giving them my best cards.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It gets pretty rough.
The worst.
But yeah,
for sure.
Ladder climbing is definitely like different, you know.
Yeah. But also, don't be afraid to be a little creative. I mean, there's Hiratsuko Consumes All and Explorer as one example of a great hate piece for a lot of archetypes out there. You know, it hits a lot of stuff in spirits. It really hits those sacrifice decks.
Oh, the cat decks kind of like...
yeah, the cat decks just get... I mean,
rough.
the reason that we see Hiratsuko Consumes all over the place is because it hits the cat, the oven, and then on turn 2 it exiles the graveyard. And
it's food, so they can't get the cat back. And then you're right. Then they exile the graveyard, and that's it. All your cards are just gone now.
Yeah.
You can't get your stuff
back. But
back.
At the same time, depending on what your deck is trying to do, there are other options out there that can do that too. And some of them are not seeing play right now. Like one example that comes to mind immediately that's similar to Hiratsuko Consumes All is Culling Ritual from Strixhaven. Green black for 4. It hits all permanents with mana value 2 or less, and then you get mana for all of those things that are destroyed. So in a ramp situation, that could be an excellent sideboard piece, because if your opponent has plenty of stuff to blow up with that, you could then get a ton of mana that you could use to drop a really big threat. Also, just if I could throw this out there, it's a fun combination with Diregraph Rebirth as well. Because as you're killing your opponent's stuff, you're getting mana, and Diregraph Rebirth becomes cheaper because stuff is dying.
Oh, right.
So those two are like, that's just one of those little interactions. Like, be creative. You might find some stuff that in certain situations, in certain board states, in certain matchups, might be pretty powerful, you know, if you can get there. I mean, obviously the Culling Ritual Diregraph only works if you already have something in your graveyard to get back with Rebirth, you know, so obviously you got to jump through some hoops to make that work. But if you've jumped through those hoops, you could wipe your opponent's entire board and pull back like an Ulamog out of your graveyard and watches your opponent scoops. You know, it feels pretty good when that happens. You know,
I will
So,
say, just as we were talking about just general deck building in general,
mhm.
you had talked about reanimate, and I know by the
kind of
way, for folks who
kind
are
of my
new
thing.
here,
Yeah,
Ham is a big time reanimate fan. I know that.
yeah,
But
I'm a
I
fan.
was also going to say that recently I had attempted uh, to try and make transmogrify Luca a thing.
Mm.
Gosh, it is not nearly as good as reanimate. And the reason is
Mm.
in Explorer, there are so many cheap, with the fact that they have access to Fatal Push and other things,
Mm.
all those tokens, every single one of those tokens, as soon as they recognize what you're doing, if you have a competent opponent who's like sees what you're doing,
Mhm.
as soon as you resolve a bunch of dumb like goblin tokens, they're
Right.
going to hold up 1 black mana. And then as soon as you attempt to resolve a Transmogrifier or a Luca targeting it, they're just going to Fatal Push it. So don't play Transmogrify. Play Reanimate instead, because Graveyard Hate is much more rare in, at least in Best of One, and
Yeah, and best of one for sure.
at
And
least in main board effects. But Fatal Push is typically a 3 or 4 of in every list, because
That plays black.
it play
Mhm.
every deck in Explorer feels like it plays black these days.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Uh, no help that another great card that was printed in Strixhaven. It's so funny. We were talking earlier about power levels of sets
Mhm.
and the ebb and flow and how they've kind of corrected. So back when I started playing, as I mentioned, the core of my childhood learning this game was in the Urza's block, which was so insanely broken that I recall one of the research and development folks said, if we do another one of these, it's going to be the end, because the trajectory for power level is unstoppable. So what do? They printed Marcadian Mask, and they printed Nemesis, and they printed something else. But anyways,
Prophecy.
Prophecy. Thank you.
Mhm.
So 99, 2000, 2001 was a dark era for Magic. I mean, there was the era of Rebels and Mercenaries, which were very good.
Yeah, Rebels ended up getting banned. Talk about
Rebels were, of
standard
Yeah.
course,
bans.
better and got
Yeah.
banned. Yeah.
Mhm.
But um uh it was still an insane downshift in power from that set. So anyway, the change in the power level is something you're going to see significantly. Strixhaven, for example, was, in my opinion, and you guys, Pizza and Ham, you guys may disagree, in my opinion, the cellar of power level, with some exceptions,
Mhm.
right? EI
Yep.
is EIC's immediate play in Delver, in Legacy Delver, because of the card selection, similar to Brainstorm and similar to Ponder,
Mhm.
whatever. It's just card selection. But
Right.
beyond things like EI and a couple of bombs, Velomachus and stuff like that, the
Mhm.
set was insanely low power, very very low power.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Because
the best things were like the lessons. You just have
yeah, and I
expensive
think
Right.
iteration
yeah,
and the
exactly.
lessons.
And I think they tried too hard to shoehorn the whole in, we're not actually Harry Potter, but we are, type of thing. And
Right.
I really
Yeah.
wish that Boros Spirits had become more of a thing, because there's so
Mhm.
many good cards that make Boros
Yeah,
Spirits a
there's some
thing.
cool things going
Oh,
on with it.
100%. The
Ugh,
first time that I saw Quintorius, like, the
yes.
design on that card is so cool. I was like, "Oh, man, I wanna make this real. I wanna make this deck," and it just didn't work. It just didn't
Doesn't
have enough
work.
juice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, so that was the reason Strixhaven was so bad, is because you got to remember, every set that you see right now, when Dominaria United comes out here, what, September 9th? September 9th?
Mhm. The
Is that the
first
right
on
date?
Arena, the ninth in paper, yeah.
So when it comes out, you have to remember, every set that you're seeing is 18 months or more in development. So the reason Strixhaven was so bad and so low powered, and in my opinion, the worst. So I'm primarily a draft player. If you ever see me on Twitch, I primarily spend my time doing limited. I almost exclusively do limited on stream, because I do like the kind of randomness, the diversity of play, whatever. Strixhaven for me was a dark age, because they tried a little bit too hard to do the whole schools of magic, and of course they also deviated from. I keep saying Boros, for example. If you were to ask a new player to Magic, they say, "What is Boros?" Right? Because that's a guild that has not existed since whatever Guild Gate or whatever, whenever it was introduced as a
Mhm.
namesake. So yeah, I think you have to remember that development of sets is in response to extreme highs and lows in perceived power level, and R&D's efforts to try and kind of smooth that
Yeah,
out.
kind of
But
balance everything
unfortunately,
out.
it has a delay, right? It has an 18
Mhm.
month or more delay because you have to commission artists, you have to get R&D, you have to get financing, you have to. It just it takes time, so it's always a little bit of a delayed response, and then unfortunately, it's up to the restricted and ban supervision to assess the state of the format, whatever format that may be, to determine what needs to be restricted or banned. And I think it almost always goes badly. I mean, everyone's always angry. It's
Mhm.
even if it's a good band, people are just like, "Oh, that was my favorite deck."
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that that's what they always have to have a hard time doing is they got to make a lot of different fan bases happy, especially like it really ties into what I said earlier, where everyone needs to not get caught up so much in all the big stuff all the time because it's really what you want to get out of Magic. Just because one thing happens doesn't necessarily mean that it's like affecting you. It really comes down to all these core kind of like basic principles of the game, and I think that that's the latter specifically. I think that if you want to get to Mythic at the end of the day, you really do. If you want to get to Mythic fast, you really do have to accept the fact that you're gonna have to play one of these decks that's like red deck, spirit deck,
Mhm.
angels, Rakdos mid range. You gotta play these best
God.
decks if you want to get to Mythic in 3 days, 4 days a week, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah, if
if
you want to be fast,
yeah, if you want
exactly.
to grind up super quick, speed up there. But if you're mostly looking for like a good time and really want to get there with your homebrew, you have to understand that it's going to take you a little bit of time because one, it's going to take you time to figure your deck out, and then two, it's going to take you time to figure out everyone else's deck and what the most popular things are and how to beat them. And then some days you might see
Mhm.
Sure.
this one popular deck more than another day, and then how are you dealing
Right.
with that? So I think that all these things that we've talked about today specifically are all things that you definitely should be keeping in mind, and specifically for competitive play. Like I said, like this podcast, I really wanted it to be something more for everyone who's essentially grinding, who plays in our tournaments, who jumps on the ladder trying to get to Mythic, maybe to qualify for another major tournament, to kind of hit that next level in your playing career, essentially. Like, all these things can help guide you in the right direction, kind of have a better understanding of what you're trying to get out of the game and how you can get to it. And I think that competitive Magic is a very easy thing to kind of slip into some of the negative headspace and negative aspect of it because you're not winning enough, or oh, my deck's not doing the thing enough, or oh, I've seen
Mhm.
Yorion 6-7 times in a row. I really hate this right now. Like, there's all kinds of
Sure.
different factors, and there's all kinds of different things that end up happening in this game, and it's always okay to step away from it, and it's also okay to get better. Not even the
Mhm.
best players in the world are still getting better. Even the best players in the world make mistakes. It's a
Mhm.
game. It has, like OhOneNine said, it's literally the most interesting game ever made. So don't be too hard on yourself. Always try to take things lightly. Take a break when need be.
Yeah, and don't lose sight of the reality of your situation. And what I mean by that is, especially if you're trying to ladder up quickly, because in order to rank up quickly, you need a couple things. You need a positive win rate. So you need to be
Yes.
winning more than 50% of the time. Just on average, you just have to. There's like mathematically no way to do it if you're not doing that. Until once you get to platinum. Once you get to platinum, if you want to go above platinum, you need to be, more than 50%. But also, you want to be playing a deck that can win quickly. And that's why these like really lightning fast aggro decks are so popular. The red deck wins the Boros aggros in standard right now. Like those decks are really, really popular because, especially in like best of one or even in best of three, you still see them all over. The idea is they can win a game. They can even win a best of three match in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They get in, do the thing. By turn four, it's over. Boom, moving on to the next
Two
game.
tap lands,
So,
you lose the game.
so if you're playing, if you're playing, uh, if you're playing that style of deck, what can happen is you can be going up against, or you can be winning, and then you just happen to hit a deck where the person has the right answers for your early game and stalls you out and somehow locks you out of the game. And you might end up losing that game, or especially in best of three, that match. And what will end up happening is that game will last significantly longer
Mm,
than your other games.
sure.
And so, as a direct result, you might spend half an hour winning at which time you won 5-6 matches or 5-6 games, and then you could spend a half an hour losing, and it's 1.
Yeah, that's
or
rough.
maybe 2.
That's
So
rough.
it'll feel really bad, but statistically, you're still crushing it. Like don't lose sight of that, because we've all had that. We've all gone up against the person who hits you with Divine Purge for the 3rd frickin' time, and you just, or they happen to hit the Ugin on turn 5 or 6, and it's just like, it happens, and there's nothing, and it feels like it may take them a while to actually close the game, but you're already out of it. And if those kind of situations happen, another great tool that I've found, I don't scoop very quickly. I don't concede games. A lot of time I have people in my chat being like, "Why are you still in this?" And I was like, "Cause I got about a 5% chance of pulling this out. I'm going to give it a shot." Let's hold out. At the very least, I'll see what the next card draw is. Like, okay, and I'll explain. Like, all right, well, if we draw this followed by this, and they don't draw this, maybe we have, I might be able to sneak out. And like, if I see a way to victory somehow, even if it's very improbable, go ahead and play it out, because you never know. Like, sometimes you can squeak a win out when it looks impossible. It does happen, and it's really satisfying when it does.
Don't give up until you know it's really over.
Until you know. But if you get to a point where it's like, if I drew my entire deck right now, if I hit like all 30 cards, 35 cards or whatever that's sitting right there, if all of them were in my hand, could I win this game? And we've all had those moments. Like, the answer to that is no. I do not have an answer to what my opponent's doing right now. Just scoop them up and walk away. That's okay. But if that's genuinely where you're at, and we've all had those games, or like, well, okay, I had a 3 of that answers this nicely, but they countered 2 of them, and
yeah, we don't have luckily don't have what is it, spinal surgical removal.
Yeah,
we don't have surgical removal. We do have
yes.
necromentia though. We do have necromentia.
Yeah, I've gotten hit by that kind of stuff before, and it's like, yeah, there is, if your opponent hits a good, and that's actually one of the things that's really fun about brewing your own decks, is opponents when they hit you with like early pithing needles or necromencias or things like that, they might just straight whiff. It feels great.
Everything everything you're saying right now is just making me want to play more and more and more of my mono black discard deck.
I love it. Do it. Absolutely.
The thing is, like, that's the other thing. One other phrase we have not mentioned at all in this podcast is the concept of a pet deck, right? So I have, for me, my pet deck, and I am not ashamed to admit it, is mono black discard and historic. It has a 54% win rate. So why in the world am I playing it? I mean, I have to play 100 matches.
54 is still not bad, though. I mean, it's above 50. So you're winning more than half your games. I mean, that's still
I've
good.
had pet decks
you know how many matches you have to play, though? But I'm talking Tiny Bones, Waste Not, Thoughtseas, Mainboard Duress. We've got Turgid, my girl, Turgid. And a little bit of Davriel. My whole it is a deck that, as soon as I see, like we were talking earlier, when I see Mountain Goblin, Mountain Robber of the Rich, I just scoop. But it's not an assault. It's not it's not a salt scoop. It's just that I'm here to beat Azorius control, and when I do, resolutely, it brings absolute joy to me, because dismantling the Teferis and the counter spells and everything, making it so that it's a one for one with Duress or Thought Distortion, a card that my god can't be countered. Exile your whole hand. Picasso.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I'm right there with you, man. And I'll tell you right now, listeners, if you have not resolved a Thought Distortion and hit like 5 cards with it, you are missing out. Like, have you really played Magic?
It has to be against either is it or Azorius. Is it or Azorius? And when you hit that, and their entire hand is full of counter spells and Wandering and Teferi and stupid Shark Tornado. Yes. And they all go to exile.
Oh yeah.
Go away forever, never to be seen again.
If you're not familiar with Thought Distortion, it's a sorcery for 4 black. This spell can't be countered. Critical text there. Target opponent reveals their hand. Exile all non-creature, non-land cards from that player's hand and graveyard.
Savage. Get him out of here. Get him out of here.
So yeah,
it's nasty.
We've definitely gone over quite a bit of topics today. I really hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. I mean, I think that we've given at least like some core fundamentals to essentially help grow your game and help establish your game a little bit better And if you're new at the game, at least we've given you a lot more information that you can kind of take in and use going forward. If you have any questions, don't be afraid. All of our content's going to be down below in the description. Reach out, contact us if you need anything, if you want to play some games. If you enjoyed the video, if you made it this far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, bell notification, like the video, and leave a comment down below. It would be greatly appreciated. We host 3 tournaments a month. All are free to play with cash prizes. On the 20th of August, we're actually going to have a free-to-play standard event as well. So definitely get in on that. HamHocks and OhOne, you got anything else to say here?
No. Just keep brewing. I mean, have fun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I daily make terrible decks that I bring into stream. You know, as I'm prepping myself for whatever stream it is, I'm like, okay, am I actually gonna play this trash today? And then you know what, you gotta prep yourself. You gotta come in there and be like, you know what, I'm gonna lose a lot today. I'm gonna lose a lot today.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are gonna come in for the first time in my stream, and they're gonna look at this and be like, look at this bozo. Does he have no idea what he's doing? And when in reality, I'm just out here, I'm just trying to have fun, just trying to play something a little bit different, and I'm eventually, Pizza, I'm gonna win one of your damn tournaments with one of my garbage brews. You know what? It's gonna the law of unnatural numbers. It's gonna happen eventually. You know that, right?
Oh yeah.
But,
I gotta say, I love the brews that you bring to those tournaments, and when it comes to it, down to it, yeah, I completely echo all that. Have fun. The goal of this game is to have fun. We can't forget that. Whatever it is that brings you joy in Magic the Gathering, whatever it is that brought you into the game, focus on that and lean into it. Like for me, I love the process of building a deck. Like I love deck building and creating these weird little machines. I love it. I can't get enough of it. And that's the part that drives me. So that's what I do. And you know what? Yeah, to your point, I lose a lot. I do. Like if you look at my stats, you know, like I keep that tracker, and like I'm like my total like career stats for the last couple of months, I'm at like 45%. You know,
Whatever,
and I like
who
to think of myself as a
cares?
pretty good player, but it's because I'm playing all these weird, janky, off-meta things. And yeah, they're going to lose a ton before they win. But that's okay, because the joy that I get out of this game is not in winning at all costs. If the thrill of that victory screen is what drives you, that's fine. But know that and lean into it. Don't forget the play queue is here. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong. You don't have to play rank just because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
if that's not what brings you joy.
True.
Yep. So yeah,
Find what makes you happy to do that. Yeah.
I was gonna say, and I hope you guys actually borrow this phrase, because I borrowed it as soon as someone said this to me. It became like permanently imprinted in my brain, and I think we said it a couple times during the podcast here. The unsolvable puzzle of Magic. Most people approach a thing like a puzzle, and they look at it on their table, on their coffee table, and they say there's 500 pieces to this, and once all 500 pieces are inserted, I win, or it's over. Right. Imagine playing Magic, and for example, right now there are 30. I believe as of New Capenna, there are 34,000 unique cards in Magic the Gathering. You could spend a lifetime trying to memorize all of them and see how they interact. It's impossible. It's not for a human being in their life. You could not, even someone who's been playing since the 90s. So what you have to do is approach this torrent, this wave that's coming over top of you with 34,000 cards that you have probably seen, I don't know, 1,000 of, 1,000 of, maybe if you're new, far less. And just say, you know what, I'm not going to know all of it, but I'm going to have fun trying to figure this out.
So, yep, with that, we're going to go ahead and, like I said, you can find all the information to our content down below in the description, our tournaments, and all that. And I hope that you all stay cheesy. Catch you next time.